Today I'm going to be talking about an article that I wrote in 1992 called Thoughts on Structure. And it's all about our ideas in the middle of the Dramatica theory and software development before we'd figured it all out, where we thought we stood. And it was written to share with Chris Huntley, the co-creator, and Steve Greenfield, the programmer, what was going on with the theory at that point, so that we're all on literally the same page. Okay, so I'll read through it and annotate as I go. The basis of our work is the assumption that story structure is not about the interrelationships between real people. No, but rather represents the elements and dynamics of a single human mind. What the hell does that mean? The elements and dynamics of human. Okay, it's simple as this. Along the process of working with the theory, where we started just saying, what does the main character do? What's a protagonist do? What are the names of the characters? What kinds of things happen in the plots? We began to see that certain kinds of things kept repeating, and certain families of things sort of seemed to go together. And as we began to put Post-it notes, hundreds of them all over the walls, we realized one day I was looking at this and said, we've been trying to figure out what's the psychology of the main character. Why does Scrooge not see he's the source of the problem? And so we put all the psychology things we could find out about the main character on the wall, but there were other psychology things that didn't pertain to the main character. It seemed almost as if it pertained to the story itself, the story at large. Well, what's psychology doing in the story at large? Why would that be the case? And then I had this eureka moment. I said, perhaps, I'll bet that the story itself has its own psychology, as if it's a super character, as if it has a mind of its own. Every story has a mind of its own. It's true. And so once we realized that, we began to map this out and say, well, what elements are in the story and which ones are unique to the main character, and put all the pieces together, called it the story mind. And we'll have a lot to say about that in future documents, maybe even this one as I continue to annotate as I go. It says here, the situations and conditions we find in life are infinite in variety. So if there's to be a structure of story that is meaningful to an audience, it must take the basic structure of the mind and apply it to specific scenarios, so that the structure is always there. Like a Rubik's Cube is always a Rubik's Cube, but you twist and turn it, you always twist and turn the same way, but you end up with different patterns depending on the dynamics you put into it and the way you decide you want to wind it up. Okay, and the same thing with stories. When you wind up your story and add all that dramatic tension, as if you're winding a spring, you can wind it many different ways, but it's the same story mind spring at the heart of it. All right. Well, all of the elements in a mind must be included in the structure to prove the author's point. You can't leave any out. You've left a hole in your argument. And the selection of how to arrange those elements determines the point of view in that particular scenario, where you want to position your audience in regard to the story. Now, all the elements of the mind, I just read that, God bless it. What follows is an outline of the information we have so far assembled, describing the nature of the elements, their arrangement, the choices within that arrangement available to the author, and the effect that those changes have on the meaning of the story. In other words, this is what we understand right now. First, there are 4 types of information included in this document. 1, information we're sure of. We got this. We understand it. We know where it came from. We know why it's there, and it's never changed. 2, information we're reasonably sure is true, but it hasn't had its complete due diligence yet. We haven't tested it enough in the real world and real stories and other things to see that it's accurate. 3, information we speculate may be correct because it seems like that would fill in this gap if it worked the same as this over here, and it's the natural extension. But we've done no work on that. And 4, areas we can define as requiring information we do not yet possess. In other words, the unknown unknowns. And that's as far as we could go. So down here, it says, what we have learned so far. And so I'm going to summarize now for Chris and Steve and you guys in 1992, where we were. And here's what we found. Bullet points. Story structure is a projection of the elements and dynamics of a single human mind. So if you have within you a sense of reason and a sense of passion, if sometimes you have faith and other times you're you're a skeptic, you have skepticism. I gotta get those fixed. Okay, if that's the case, within us we have certain traits that we all share. And in stories, those traits become manifest as archetypal characters. So there will be in a story a character who's the voice of reason. There will also be a character who expresses the passion. Think of it with your heart, not with your head, that kind of thing. And then you have the faithful character, often a sidekick, who's like, "Yeah, we can do this, go, go, rah, rah." And then you have the resident skeptic. Whatever it is, I'm against it. I don't think we can make it. The cowardly lion. We better turn back. This isn't going to work. Okay. So these are just some of the archetypes. But the archetypes in story structure, they're single-minded. The character who's the voice of reason is always just, this is the approach they take. They always use reason. They don't think about what feels right. They don't have skepticism. They don't have faith. They're just trying to figure it out. Whether they're smart or not is incidental. They use logic. Okay, that's their methodology. So that's why the characters, when it pertains to that central issue, that scenario that I spoke about earlier, when you're dealing with that, then you're going to have archetypes that represent the different facets of the human mind. And that's what these characters are. They're just facets of a single mind. The story itself is a super character, a story mind. And these are its facets. Wish I had some glasses to take off. These are its facets. Okay. So if you just did it that way, they wouldn't seem like real people. And that's why when dealing with their own issues and their own lives and talking about their own problems and the people they're involved with, they always use all of them, logic and passion and skepticism and faith and all the other archetypes. They use all of that for their personal stuff. But when it comes to the central core of the story structure, well, in that case, they're just going to be single-minded, 100% characters. I'm all this, I'm all that, each one representing a facet, so it's easy to follow them and see what's going on. All right. So story structure is a projection of the elements and dynamics of a human mind, and there are 4 levels of the mind. Oh, yes, there are 4 levels, and hence 4 levels of structure. Well, if you've ever seen the Dramatica table of story elements, or seen the expanded 3D tower that looks like a 3D chess set with 4 different towers, you can see that those levels represent the different levels of the mind. And those levels that are the pre-conscious, the conscious, memory, and subconscious. Let me say a word about those. What's the pre-conscious, conscious, memory, and subconscious? Well, the pre-conscious is the filter that stands between you and your perception of the universe. Your senses see the universe, but there's a filter before that that causes some things to be blacked out, redacted, other things to be added, some amplified, some diminished. And this comes from 2 places: experience in your own life and also instinct, something that's built in to your particular I don't know, say heritage of your mind, as it were, that there's some kinds of things that are just enhanced. If you want to know what the preconscious is kind of like, sit in a room that has an air conditioner, and after a while you may not hear the air conditioner, or a ticking clock, and you tune it out until somebody brings it up. Or in my case, tinnitus in my left ear, and I don't even think about it until some stupid idiot like me just brings it up, like now, and now I hear for the last 20 years in my left ear. Yeah. Oh, well. Anyway, that's the preconscious. And so part of it we come bundled with, and the other half of it is built from experience. These levels are kind of like, imagine consciousness, awareness, that you see something at the top, whatever comes through the preconscious, you see it, and that's your conscious level where you're making decisions, you're thinking about it, you've got control of it. And then that filters through and becomes memory. And memory, sometimes you have muscle memory and other things that can affect what you do without you even thinking about it, or you can call upon it, sometimes with more difficulty than other times, especially as you get older like me. You have to go circuitous routes to try and find just what it is you're looking for: a word, a name, something you remember. You know you got it, but you don't quite grab it. I think the addressing scheme kind of vanishes, and that's what you're losing, not the information, but the means of getting there. It's just some sort of efficiency, compacting the data in your head. Too much information in life. Anyway, then you go down from memory, and that eventually comes by like snowfall. It comes by and it drifts, and then those drifts go down into the subconscious that make these big mounds of what you're attracted to and what you're repelled from, mounds and troughs. It creates a topography of your mind in the subconscious that just leads you to want to be drawn to this, to be drawn to that. Just like I don't think that in birds, for example, that they sit there saying, "Oh, look, I'm going to build myself a nest because it's almost spring." I think they're just flying around. They look, "Oh, that's a nice twig. Gee, I feel like picking that twig up." Not in words, of course. They pick the twig up. I'd like to put that in that tree right there, and they do. "Oh, that's great. There's another twig. I think I'd like to do the same thing." And they're just drawn to it at that emotional. That's your subconscious. And below that, if it calcifies into ice, then these mounds of ice are going to create lenses. Okay. And those are the lenses through which you see the universe because it wraps around again. The conscious, the memory, the subconscious, and the preconscious, which now stands in front of the conscious. And those lenses amplify and they also diffuse so that you don't see things in the world and you do see things. And that's confirmation bias that you hear about all the time, is that people actually don't see the truth. And that gets back to Scrooge as to why he can be the source of the problem in A Christmas Carol, and he doesn't see it. It's not that he just denies it, he just doesn't see it. We call it a blind spot, and that's what we had learned by that point in the story, is about these blind spots. So getting through that, preconscious is the sensual input or observation with filters, memory, storage of accessible patterns and data. Consciousness is the dynamic tools of comparison between patterns and memory and observation. You can juggle all that. You don't have access to your subconscious, which is storage of fixed patterns of data that are maintained against change. In other words, they become the things that make you reticent to reconsider because you've had enough experience, to stay away from that. You'll get burned, or there's danger, or oh, that's probably going to be something good to eat. I'm going to go get that. These are operating at that subconscious level. Why do you like chocolate over vanilla? Explain to me why. Do you like it? Oh, absolutely. You know that. That's subconscious. Okay. Now, story deals with a mind containing an inequity at the subconscious level. That's the beautiful thing. A mind that has a problem at the subconscious level can't see it. It's just something's not working, and you don't know why. You don't know if it's you or your universe. And so you have to look all the way down through that and try and figure out where that problem is and uncover things and rip them apart as the story evolves until you can actually get down to the core and say, okay, here's the issue. Now, do I like that? Am I the problem? Is it the problem? And you don't have enough information, so you have to make a leap of faith at the end of the story. All right, so that's maintained against change. Story deals with a mind containing an inequity at the subconscious level. The dynamics of the story follow the progression of the mind with a subconscious inequity to a point where it consciously sees the nature of the inequity. Well, I just said that, didn't I? Too many words. The subconscious is a blind side or a blind spot, that it's only aspect of the mind that's not accessible to the conscious, which can look at preconscious, look at observation, basically, and look at memory, and then you're inside evaluating those two. So mind first looks at those three aspects to try and solve a problem and an equity. And if it can't do it, well, then Act 1, 2, and 3 of the story represent these other three aspects of the mind that the consciousness is now going to query to try and find out where the problem is. Now, when all have been explored and the inequity remains, it's apparent the inequity must be in the subconscious, the blind side of ourselves. We don't use that term anymore, blind side, but it was handy here. The subconscious isn't explored as it's truly invisible to the mind. Rather, the mind must make a leap of faith and accept that the problem must be there, as it was not found anywhere else. Whatever is impossible, whatever remains must be true. Sherlock Holmes, I guess. Since all motivation springs from the subconscious, this is where the nature of a human mind is determined. Its nature, what kind of a mind you have, because it's all built on the motivations. In order to resolve an inequity of the subconscious, you actually have to change the nature of who you are. And that is the hardest thing to do, to say, hey, guys, I'm going to change who I am because I've discovered that I have a problem down there that is actually the foundation of many of my belief systems and everything at the bottom of the pyramid. And that brick is out of place. And so I'm going to have to tear the whole thing down and rebuild myself because that's a fundamental issue. The rest of them at the top, you can see them and deal with them. When it gets down to the subconscious, you pretty much may change the nature of who you are if you address something that small, just like Scrooge did, and then became, the kindest man the old town had ever known. Okay. So if the mind does not accept making a leap of faith and does not change, the inequity continues. And you just keep being that kind of person, like some folks in politics these days. Right? They don't see they're actually the problem. Backstory. Okay, this is what we knew so far in terms of our thoughts on structure. And it says here, backstory is the progression of the mind from consciously considered dilemma to subconsciously balanced inequity. All right, so backstory shows how somebody who's got it all together built up a view that either was wrong to begin with, and now they're discovering it, or was right under the initial circumstances, but now circumstances have changed and it doesn't reconsider it because it always worked, and so it just assumes that where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay, it was, but maybe it's not no more. So that's when the backstory has told you how this came to be, that somebody's got a warped point of view and doesn't recognize it. A dilemma, another definition here, a dilemma is a choice between two things that are mutually exclusive and equally desired or undesired. Okay, if you want this, you want that, you can't have chocolate and vanilla, you got to pick one. What if you want them both equally? How do you resolve that? Or if you don't want this and don't want that, but you've got to choose one of them, you're going to take your bitter tasting pill or a quick injection. Okay. So that's a dilemma. And we had to define dilemma because a dilemma is the basis of not being able to do anything until you're ready to make a leap of faith. We'll get into that in other documents. If one suspects time may change the situation or the desire, then you'll delay your decision as much as possible to give this potential change time to occur. So if you don't have to make it, like going to the doctor's office, taking a test, but you've got 3 weeks to do it, if you're thinking of getting some way out of it, something may change, then you just don't jump out and do it. Usually you wait to see if you can avoid the unpleasantness that you have to deal with. So since an unresolved dilemma requires conscious attention to reevaluate, knowledge of the dilemma must be removed from the conscious to allow it to function efficiently while the mind delays decision. So this is how we hide things from ourselves. So we say, well, I don't have to deal with that now. I'll deal with it later. If there's no time limit, if there's no situational requirement that you make a choice about something, when you become aware that there's a problem deep in the subconscious and there's no reason to deal with it now, the mind will forget about it. They'll stop looking. Just like you always say, oh yeah, I meant to add that to the grocery list. If there's something that you don't want to deal with and you don't have to, eventually you stop thinking about it. Okay, and to that end, the subconscious creates an untruth or inequity that counterbalances the ongoing observation that the dilemma remains. So you come up with something else, a dog with a fluffy tail, or some other thing you don't like, that you say, here's the source of my problems right now, and eventually you're focusing so much on that you forget about the one that may be inside yourself. These are all initial thoughts. We eventually put that all into an amazing amount of incredibly sophisticated algorithms in a model that actually describes how all these things affect each other, like that Rubik's Cube. And when you turn this, it's going to pull that with it, even things you're not looking at. So we'll cover all this stuff. And of course, you can always go to Dramatica.com and learn everything about it. All that information is up there, the way it ended up, and as well as the new AI-driven Dramatica app that will allow you to structure your story in the background while you have conversations with an AI chat engine. And basically, you don't have to learn the theory anymore. AI learned the theory for you in our system, and it will make sure that everything is structurally good that you're doing. And if not, it'll tell you, and it'll even make suggestions about what you ought to do to stay structurally consistent in your story while you're working. It's pretty cool. It's not expensive. It's at Dramatica.com. Anyway, so the patterns of immutable truth in the subconscious sit in the spots where data from observation is directed and prevents new data on that subject from being registered. Yeah, it's like a black hole. once you establish a black hole, nothing's getting out of there without great outside intervention, like a larger black hole or something that would disrupt it. Okay. So as a result, you end up putting something into you, creating a blind spot, and there's nothing going to put it out of there until something from the outside. Internally, you can never get out of that. A prejudice, um, any kind of a belief system that you will not reevaluate, even in the face of new data. When it gets in that tight, nothing's going to dislodge it unless something makes you do it from the outside. Makes it more important to you to reconsider it than to just hold on to your beliefs. So, in essence, the subconscious filters the preconscious. Interestingly, it actually prevents the preconscious from getting through with what it will allow you that's already been filtered, because the subconscious that has this inequity has now created a blind spot. Have you ever noticed scientifically that if you have a little spot on the screen, like right here, and you stare off to the other side like this, oh no, other side like that, then that little spot will disappear. You can sort of look outside your field of vision. The eye will fill in what it's not looking at if it's inconsistent with the background. Isn't that interesting? And that's a reflection of what the mind does. When you're not looking at something, then it will filter it out and it becomes invisible. So that's exactly the way it works in the mind as well. You'll find these kinds of fractal relationships and resonance and system resonance between biology and psychology all over the silly human body. Anyway, so this creates a view of the environment that's at odds with reality, and therefore it creates a problem with perception. Now, when the inequity is built into the non-accessible subconscious, the dilemma is invisible to the conscious as long as the environment doesn't force reawareness of the situation as described. It is the function of the antagonist in a story. Well, we thought it was the antagonist then, but let me correct that. It's the influence character, okay? The influence character, the one who causes the main character to ultimately have to question their belief system in the story. Not saying only about it. It's the function of that character to force reawareness of the dilemma by disturbing the supporting environment. In other words, changing the information and situation in such a way that it causes the character to have to reevaluate for their own survival, or for the survival of someone they love, or for something that's really important that they can't give up, and they have to change their point of view to make it happen. That's the function of the influence character. During each act, the mind establishes a balance to the disturbance in the environment caused by this influence character. But then each act in turn, the influence character finds another way to disturb the balance, and bit by bit is actually stripping away this pyramid we talked about until at the end of the story, you get down to the bottom and the character realizes that they are now staring right at the cause of the problem, or it could just be the cause of their motivation. And the world really needs to get in line with that. Who's right? The character that has a strong drive that they've held onto forever, I will make it in Hollywood, or the character who has no talent and says, I will make it in Hollywood. Does one have to admit that they have no talent, that it's not going to happen, or that the situation won't break their way? When do you give up? Even if you have to face that issue, are you ready to let it go? Or do you have to take a leap of faith and say, each way has an equally strong argument? I just have to jump into the dark from the lion's head, take a leap, and believe that I've made the right choice. Odds are going to be 50-50 on a leap of faith. That's about it. So, from the character point of view, they are being forced by this influence character to deal with this thing act by act until it becomes more and more refined, and you can actually see the core issue that has all these tendrils into the way you're thinking, all these layers. You get down to one and you say, this is what it is, and that's what it feels like. You're being pressured by this character. So in this way, the dilemma is rediscovered, leading the character to a choice to resolve it or rebury it. You can always say, no, I'm going to stick with the way I'm doing it. Characters don't have to change to grow. They can grow when they're resolved. Scrooge changes, but a character like Clarice Starling, she holds on to her resolve and won't let the screaming lambs go. And that makes her very good at her job, but it also leaves her very miserable because she can't let it go. So you can remain steadfast, and you'll find that in Dramatica on Dramatica.com. All right, each level of the mind contains 16 characteristics or elements. Okay, that changed a lot. We end up in the model now, there's 64 elements at the bottom, character elements, and above that are the thematic issues. And there's also 64 names, but 4 towers. Okay, each tower has 64 elements, 16 thematic variations, 4 types of plots, and a class, which is the genre level at the top. But because of the way they're named, the same 64 elements by name show up at the bottom of each tower, because that's when you're getting down to the nitty gritty, and it's always the same, but through those 4 perspectives that you have of looking through the 4 classes, which are universe, physics, mind, and psychology. Those are the 4 filters. It changes the way those elements at the very bottom appear to interconnect, to be arranged. But in total, in terms of different names, 64 elements. Across the 16 elements in each of the 4 classes, there's 64 variations, and then there's 16 types and 4 classes at the top of the genre level: character, theme, plot, and genre as you go up. All right, so I can skip this part. It's actually so wrong, I don't even want to repeat it, but I may scan this document and share it with you sometime, but this is the best you're going to get for now. All right, so there are 8 environmental or external characteristics for each archetype, and that makes up the action elements they have. And there's also 8 mental or internal elements, and that makes up the decision line for the characters. Every archetype will have more than this, we found out, but at least an internal and an external element, and they will hang together and be consistent. So that you have a character who is an action character, and they also pursue. That's what makes a protagonist. But those things can be mixed up to create much more interesting characters who are non-archetypal and even complex characters. And again, you'll find that in Dramatica, but it's beyond the scope of this early document. Okay, now it just goes through and lists all the different numbers of elements here. It's like reading the Bible and going through Leviticus and Deuteronomy with all the begats. This guy begat that, and this guy begat that. Listen to some of this. There are 16 quads. 4 quads are arranged in sets of 4 called levels. The names outlined in purple are the 4 elements of the preconscious. The ones in red are the... Okay, it just goes on like that through the end of it. And again, a lot of that is not correct. That's where it really falls apart, because at the bottom of this document, that's where I was beginning to get to the bottom of the barrel of what we knew, and we're starting to approach those areas that we're just speculating or maybe even shooting blind at that point. But anyway, you saw where we were, and if you know anything about Dramatica and compare it to the way it is today, it's quite different, and yet a lot of those initial thoughts halfway through the process, from seriously working full-time on it all the way to the release of the theory book, first edition, and the first version of the software, right here in the middle, partway there, okay? It was a lot of work doing the critical thinking necessary to go through all of this stuff and make sense of it and prove it, that it hangs together that way. Be inspired to think, well, how does this hang together? And to say, is that hang together because it's going to flip or rotate elements? Because these things are part of the same family? Because it has this relationship to human psychology? Because there's the psychology of the main character within the psychology of the large story. How does that work? How do they relate? What are the parallels in real life? Well, that's too much to get into today. It's beyond the scope of the document, and also beyond the scope of the 30 minutes I've limited myself to on these talks.